You know it was coming. Another weapon tier list. All right, let's get started. So we are here on Tier Maker again, and this will be, I promise, my final tier list video, at least until the game launches. So if you're watching this video, it's either the day before New World launches or possibly after. And we're gonna make a video on what weapon should you start with in New World tier list. So we're not gonna do specifically PvE, we're not gonna do specifically PvP, we are lumping them together, we're grouping them up, and we're throwing them on the tier list. All right, let's start with our first one. As you can see here on the first weapon, it is the Great Axe. If you know me, you know how much I like the Great Axe, how much I respect the Great Axe, and there is no other spot this weapon could go other than D tier. No, I'm just kidding. Easily solid S. I know it got nerfed, I know it fixed the bug, but guess what? The Great Axe is still one of the best weapons in the game. I know people were complaining, they're like, no, it's gonna be bad. It's just fine. It does a massive amount of damage, and people don't even know how to use this weapon properly. There are big damage potentials that you can do with some animation cancels that people don't even do with this weapon, and they still have it S tier as they're using it. This weapon's great, there's no doubt about it. S tier, S tier, S tier, PvE, PvP, playing, role playing, you know, I don't know, whatever you want to do. It even has the best animation when you get out the weapon. It spins it in your hand. There's nothing about this weapon that is bad. Next, let's talk about the bow. This one's always very controversial. We're just going to put it in the B tier. We did move it up one spot on our list just because with you guys complaining a lot and, you know, I mean, even when I did the list that had everybody put their information, I didn't even do it. Everybody had this as the worst weapon in the game. We're going to put it in the B tier list. If you have decent ping, if you can aim, this weapon is pretty good, especially when you get to high tier. There are some utilities that you can use with it. You can kite really well with it, but this weapon is just decent. It's not overpowered. It's not overbearing. It takes a lot of skill to use. And if you like the bow in typical games and you like shooter gameplay and you got to lead your target, you got to have bullet drop, then the bow isn't too bad. It is definitely nowhere near S tier like some people like to think it is. And maybe it's not quite C or D tier like I used to say it was. Next, let's go with the Fire Staff. The Fire Staff, we're going to put in the A tier. Now, the Fire Staff is not as great in solo PvP, even though I know you're going to be in the comment section down below like, Parfax, it is just the best dual weapon in the game. No, it's not. Just because people can use it doesn't mean it's the best weapon in the game. It's not a bad weapon by any means. It is very good. I've used it a lot. I've played against people that use it. It's a fun weapon. It does a lot of damage. They have the biggest damaging skill in the game is on the Fire Staff, and no, it's not Meteor. It's their Incinerate skill. Once you get that thing maxed up, it does absolutely insane damage, and yes, it can pretty much one-shot people, but the Fire Staff is a little bit reliant on the second weapon. You can do a Rapier, but it's not nearly as good with the Rapier as it is something like the Ice Gauntlet, mainly because if you really want to get the Incinerate damage, you really have to have something that slows or stuns the target, and the Rapier just doesn't do that very well. Is the Rapier good with the Fire Staff? Yes, it's very good, but you've got to play it a little bit different than if you played it with something like the Ice Gauntlet. Still a great weapon. Speaking of the Ice Gauntlet itself, it's going to go in the S tier. This weapon has a lot of utility. It has sustain. It has pretty much everything you want in a weapon. It's great at PvE. It's great at PvP. It doesn't put out quite as much damage as something like the Fire Staff, but what it doesn't do in damage, it makes up for in every other category. This weapon is just overall one of the best weapons in the game, and there's not really much to it. Next, we have the Hatchet. Now, again, one of the weapons that people have is one of the best weapons in the game. And yes, it saw a little bit of nerf on the patch, but it's still an amazing weapon. It is one of the best dueling weapons in the game. It is one of the best PvE weapons in the game. It has some utility in large scale PvP, but not that great. We're gonna put it, if we had an A+ tier, we'd put it in A+. We're gonna save the S tier for the absolutely great weapons up here. So we're just gonna put it in the A tier. It's really above A. It's better than the Fire Staff. We're gonna put it in like AA+, but with its sort of not so great large scale PvP, we're gonna put it right there, which is a step below where we had it last time. We definitely had it up there in the S tier on our last one, and you guys put it up there when I did my group tier list. But it did receive a couple little nerfs, not the nerfs we would have liked, but we did nerf Berserk a little bit, which I said was the biggest problem for the weapon. Next, we have the only healing weapon in the game that got nerfed significantly in the patch notes, and we're putting it solid in the S tier. It's the best weapon in the game. Nobody can really argue this. It's the best weapon in the game. It does a ton of damage. It heals you. You can scale any weapon to focus and make the other weapon almost as good as if it was scaling the main stat, but now you're just super tanky because you can heal yourself. I don't know what to say about this weapon. It needs nerfed, but you gotta watch nerfing it because you can't nerf PvE that much. PvP, PvE, roleplay, getting naked, run around town, whatever you want to do, the life staff is the best weapon in the game. Next, we have Spear, and we're gonna put Spear. I'm gonna put Spear in. Do I put it in B or A? Let's go with B. The Spear CCs very well. I would put it above the bow, but the Spear doesn't put out a lot of damage, but it does have a whole lot of CC. It is a great secondary weapon. It is probably an A or an S tier secondary weapon, but if you're gonna use it as your primary weapon, it doesn't quite have the damage that I would like. So keep that in mind if you're running something like bow spear, like these two in the B tier. That's an A to A plus tier combo. Even though these two weapons are down here pretty low, the bow mixed with the spear helps out the bow in almost all of its deficiencies, and the bow brings the damage the spear is missing. So just because this is down here in the B category, it just means by itself maybe it's not quite as good as the weapons above it, but you pair it with something like the bow, even like the musket, it can be really good. Next we have sword and shield. This one, not a lot of people use. They always use it for just the defensive side. It doesn't do a ton of damage. We're going to put it in the B tier because it doesn't do a lot of damage. It's probably the weakest weapon in the game currently for damage. Now, it has some amazing defensives, obviously, because we are going with the shield, but it has a couple abilities on there that really rock. They did buff the sword a little bit. I played it on the open beta, and it feels really good. The new dash on it's really good. They made a lot of buffs to it. It's still a B tier weapon. It doesn't do a whole lot unless you're tanking. You can use it for PvE if you want to, but you really would be better off with another weapon. In PvP, it still is really good, especially paired with something like the life staff, which can just get really tanky. You can just get like uber tanky. You can run, that's the paladin build, or you can run it with even your other weapons. You can really pair it with, and something like the great axe isn't bad to pair with it because the great axe can put out some absolutely disgusting amount of damage, and then you can just go when you want to be really tanky, you can just swap back to sword and shield, get real tanky. Next, we're gonna have the musket. The musket's a weird one. The musket is a lot of damage, but its scaling is really weird. We're gonna put it again in the B tier, and it's mainly just because you can pretty much one-shot people with a musket if you do it correctly, but if you fail, the musket's not that great. You can also, early game, if you start just putting all your points into damage and say screw any tankiness, you can pretty much one-shot mobs with it. Now, when you're doing super large group content in big wars, it's really good. In PvE, it still does pretty decent damage too. So this could easily be like an A tier weapon, but you do have to have some skill to use it, and it's kind of gimmicky because you really rely on that first shot to really get off a lot of damage. Get that powder burn going, you can really nuke down an enemy. Next, we have the Warhammer. The Warhammer is, I think we're going to put it in the B tier as well. It is an S tier PvE weapon, but probably a C tier small group PvP weapon, and then a B or an A tier, probably an A tier large scale group weapon. So we're gonna put it like B plus, A minus type of weapon. It has no movement. It is the slowest, clunkiest weapon in the game, but it provides a ton of CC and a decent amount of damage. Now, it's not nearly as much damage as something like the Great Axe, but what it lacks in damage, it really makes up for in CC and utility. But when it comes to PvP and your small group stuff, the Warhammer really lacks the movement skills. People can get away from the Warhammer pretty easily, so it can be kind of clunky in that aspect. That's why we're kind of put it in the B plus, A minus range. Last, and probably not least, is the Rapier. Now, if I were to rank this Rapier as the main weapon solely, this is going in C tier. The Rapier provides little to nothing as a main weapon, and provides okay PvE damage with no way to CC or anything like that for the most part. We're talking damage now. But if you want to go secondary weapon, it's above the spear. It is by far, if you're looking to kite, the best secondary weapon in the game. It has a riposte, it has an evade. It is just an absolute juggernaut at being a secondary weapon. At a primary weapon, it's the worst. I know people might be like, no, you can be a primary. No, everybody who runs the Rapier, for the most part, they run it as their secondary weapon, and it is S+ tier secondary weapon. But it's main weapon, and if you want to use this as your main weapon, we're gonna put it down here into the C category. I know people are gonna absolutely hate this ranking, but we're going off of main weapon. Like I said, you can pair this with a fire staff, and boom, you can put it up here with the S tier. I would say Ice Gauntlet's a little bit better with a fire staff, mainly because you want to go incinerate and do that big damage. You really kind of need the slow from the Ice Gauntlet, but it is by far one of the best secondary weapons in the game. The spear and the rapier are probably the worst. We'll put them, you know what? We'll put the spear down here in the C tier, okay? When it comes to your main weapon, these two are the worst by far. I don't even think it's really much of a choice. You can probably put the sword down here, but it does get a lot more utility for the fact that it can tank. Other than that, these two weapons, if you're trying to main your rapier user or your spear as your main weapon, it's just not going to work out very well for you, not comparatively to the others. Can you do it? For sure, but they don't provide nearly the amount of DPS, and if they do provide the DPS, you really get rid of all of their utility, which they're good at. This one's good at CC, and this one's good at evading and a little bit of CC with its riposte. So it's a weird spot they're in. They are S tier secondary weapons and they're C tier overall weapons, as in like if you're using it for your main weapon. So I know, kind of confusing, but we did kind of need a couple down here in the seed category. And if we're going just on main weapons, and if you want to primarily use one of these weapons, it's probably one of the worst in the game. So if you want to use one of these as your primary weapon, it's more than likely not going to go too well for you. You'd just be better off using one of the other weapons. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Twitch, on Twitter, as you can see right here. This was one of my old lists from a long time ago. And we'll be doing giveaways. We're going to have massive streams. We're going to have a bunch. If you're watching this video, I'll be streaming either right now or I'll be streaming in the very near future. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.